Hello everybody. Yes, this is the same day that I filmed the intro and outro to my microvascular decompression surgery vlog, and I just changed my shirt for aesthetic purposes, so here we are. But today I'm going to be talking more about my trigeminal neuralgia story, as you can see in the title, just more broadly, and kind of just what that whole entire journey has looked like for me. My name's Maria, I'm 27, and before I totally get into everything, I did make myself some pretty detailed notes because there's just so much I want to talk about. I didn't want to forget anything or leave anything out, so if you see my eyes wandering over here, it's because I have my notes over there, and I wanted to be a little bit more coherent, a little less off the cuff, so. Also, a quick side note, I'm sorry if I keep going from looking at myself to looking at my notes to looking in the camera. It's so hard not to look at yourself and to actually look in the little camera. Okay, so if you know anything about trigeminal neuralgia, you'll know that it typically only affects women over the age of 50 and typically is only in one side of your face. I am very much this anomaly in that I had bilateral trigeminal neuralgia, meaning both sides of my face, and I'm 27 years old. In the 30 years that the neurosurgeon who I eventually went to for microvascular decompression surgery at Mayo Clinic, in the 30 years that he has been practicing, I was the youngest patient that he's ever performed a microvascular decompression on. His previous youngest was 35 years old. He told me more than once that in this scenario, I am a pediatric case. And when I was first diagnosed, and especially when I was going through the surgery making decision process, there's so much that I wish that I would have known kind of about what to expect. So I'm making this video in hopes that it helps even one person who's recently been diagnosed with trigeminal neuralgia, who's just generally curious about trigeminal neuralgia, or perhaps you're even considering microvascular decompression surgery, in which case my other two videos about that would be more helpful than this. So let's rewind. It's July 8th, 2019. I'm 26 years old, and I'm standing in the elevator of my apartment building when all of a sudden I get this huge, excruciating, painful shock like I've never felt before in the right side of my face. It was excruciatingly painful, but at the time I truly didn't think too much of it because it went away as quickly as it came. In the world of trigeminal neuralgia, I'm actually extremely fortunate in that my shocks have always just been instantaneous, because there are people who have trigeminal neuralgia whose attacks last minutes or even hours, and I literally cannot imagine. So I took that next week off of work because the pain was just so great, and more so the anxiety of having no idea what was going on was just too much. I got a few more shocks in the next few days, and over about the next 5 days, it got to the point where I couldn't touch the right side of my face whatsoever without a shock. So I called my primary care physician, explained exactly the pain, and she sent me for an MRI to rule out a brain tumor or multiple sclerosis, and it came back showing neither, thank God. The fear is that it could be a brain tumor that's compressing your trigeminal nerve, and that's what's causing the pain. Maybe you're wondering why MS would be brought into the conversation. I was too. MS damages myelin, which is the protective insulation around your nerves. So the concern is that damage to your myelin from MS might be causing the pain. So I did hours upon hours upon hours of research into finding a neurologist, and I found two who I wanted to see because I always think it's just so important to get that second opinion. And long story short, I started on carbamazepine, an anticonvulsant used to treat epilepsy. I was on a low dose, maybe 200 or 300 milligrams a day for 8 weeks, and then gradually weaned off, and the pain was just gone. I was pain-free from trigeminal neuralgia for 10 months. But then on June 4th, 2020, it came back so much worse. Fast forward a little bit to about the middle of August, so about a month and a half later, and I talked to, I think, 7 different primary care physicians, neurologists, and neurosurgeons about it all over again. Every single one of them noted that because the shocks came back, because the shocks are bilateral, and because I'm so young in comparison, that it made them all very suspicious of MS. Remember though that the summer before I had an MRI to rule out MS. It showed no MS, so I thought I was good to go. Turns out one MRI is not really conclusive, not for MS at least. So my neurologist ordered a spinal tap, and on September 3rd, almost exactly 3 months after the trigeminal neuralgia came back, I went to the hospital to have that done. I'd never been a patient in a hospital in my entire life, so I was freaking out, but long story short, I was at the hospital for like 4 hours, gown, non-slip socks, IVs, the whole 9 yards, but the actual spinal tap was only about 10 minutes and was pretty tolerable pain-wise. In 6 days between getting the spinal tap and getting the results of the spinal tap, I think I slept for all of like 5 hours. Being 27 years old and trying to come to terms with possibly having MS definitely kept me up at night. What the radiologist looks for in your spinal fluid are called oligoclonal bands, and long story short, mine came back showing 0 oligoclonal bands. Thank God, literally praise God, I was weeping tears. Alright, back to the shocks. So when it started in summer of 2019, I could avoid the shocks probably 95% of the time by just not touching my face whatsoever. But when it came back 10 months later, it was everything and nothing that triggered it. Talking, chewing, laughing, or doing absolutely nothing at all. And that was the hardest and scariest part of it when it came back, was that I could be sitting doing nothing, not even moving my face, and I can get an excruciating shock. I was hell-bent on finding any sort of pattern that I could. Did it happen on days that I ate blueberries for breakfast? Did it primarily happen on Wednesdays? I figured if I could find any pattern whatsoever, then maybe I could prevent even one shock and start to find answers. So I started keeping a diary of every single shock. I made an Excel spreadsheet with 10 different columns on it. Date, the time of the shock, the intensity of the shock. So I ranked them from mild, medium to major. Mild is like, ooh, it just hurts like a bit. Medium is like, that hurt a lot. Major shock is like, that is just deadly. The area on my face where the shock happened, what exactly I was doing when I got the shock, what meds I took that day and what dosage, times I took what med, what I ate that day, other factors like maybe where I was geographically, and just other random things like, did I have wine with dinner? And spoiler alert, after doing this every single day for about 2.5 months, I found 0 patterns. It was exhausting keeping track of because sometimes I'd have as many as like 45 shocks in one day, which meant picking up my phone, opening the spreadsheet and jotting it down perhaps 45 times in a single day. Then to feel like it was all for naught when it was not revealing any sort of pattern was very disheartening. Come to later find out from the man who would eventually become a neurosurgeon that trigeminal neuralgia is a paroxysmal disease, meaning the fact that it has no pattern is the pattern of the disease. So just being on carbamazepine alone was not cutting it, and I was on the absolute highest dose possible, 1,200 milligrams a day. I'd take 300 milligrams in the morning, 300 in the afternoon, and 300 at night. So the nurse practitioner I was seeing at a new neurologist office was like, well, carbamazepine is the gold standard for this, but if it's not completely eliminating the pain, let's try Aptium, a different anticonvulsant. So it's now 11 weeks after the trigeminal neuralgia has come back, and I started weaning off of carbamazepine and onto Aptium. Long story short, it did nothing for the pain, and within 3 days of just major shocks, I was weaning back onto carbamazepine. You can maybe imagine how defeated and truly hopeless I was feeling at this point, and it had started to take a huge toll on my mental health. I also started becoming just really angry kind of at my body, thinking I eat pretty clean, I drink tons of water, I get more than enough sleep, and this is what I have to show for it. At this point, I could only eat soft foods that required a little to no chewing. Couldn't eat anything super cold like a popsicle or super hot like tea. Couldn't eat anything sticky or tacky or with seeds, and had to cut up all of my food into little tiny, literally baby-sized pieces because I couldn't open my mouth any wider than probably like this, and couldn't chew on the right side of my mouth, period. So it was a lot of applesauce, yogurt, bananas, smoothies, potatoes, and for dinner I had tofu or salmon literally 7 nights a week, to the point that I was having symptoms of mercury poisoning from literally overdosing on salmon. Also, a bit of a side note, in those 1,000+ shocks that I recorded over 2.5 months, say there was 1,000, I could open my spreadsheet and see, but say there's 1,000, probably 970 of them were on the right side of my face, 30 on the left side of my face. So although it is bilateral, it is predominantly on the right side of my face. And of those few dozen that I've ever had on the left side of my face, they've all been mild or medium shocks. So although it is still an issue and still a bit of a concern, the shocks on the right side of my face were just so much more prominent and so much more painful that this was the side to deal with first. I also couldn't wash the right side of my face, couldn't wear makeup, couldn't wear sunglasses, and had to brush my teeth with a child-size toothbrush because of how big I could or couldn't open my mouth. Don't ask me why I'm keeping this. I think maybe just to throw into a fire in some sort of celebration one day. Much harder than just not being able to do all of those things, though, was not being able to smile or laugh without a shock. There were days when it hurt so bad just to talk, and I was so afraid of opening my mouth that I'd be in the room with someone, they'd speak to me, and I would text them back in the same room. I was just not myself for what felt like forever. And one of the hardest parts about trigeminal neuralgia is that it's an invisible disease. No one can see the pain. So it's hard for others, I think, to understand how a facial pain could be so debilitating and just absolutely stop you in your tracks. You know, imagine my arm gets cut off, right? It's so much easier for others to conceptualize all the ways in which my life will now be harder because I have one arm. It's so much harder to conceptualize and understand that when you can't see the pain. I decided I just couldn't accept not being able to smile or laugh or even talk without being in excruciating pain as the status quo. I refused to accept that this was just going to be life from now on. I was also experiencing some side effects from the carbamazepine, mainly like memory issues and word finding, which was just super frustrating. Dealing with this major brain fog that you associate with, elderly people. And it was just annoying also to bring my medicine everywhere, sometimes forgetting it and then having to leave wherever I was and what I was doing to go get the medicine because I was so afraid to miss a dose. Okay, sorry, the lighting just changed like a ton, but long story long, I decided to have the microvascular decompression surgery, and I have an entire vlog style video on what it's like to actually have brain surgery, and I have another video that I'll be uploading in the near future about how I chose my surgeon, what that looked like, recovery, etc. So whether you're watching this video because you were just diagnosed with trigeminal neuralgia, or even if you've had it for years, here is my unsolicited advice, is to talk to trusted people about it, because it is an incredibly isolating thing to walk through alone. And in talking about it, you never know who in your circle or in your circles might have great resources and connections that could help you lead a shock-free life. When I wasn't loving either neurologist that I had seen thus far, I posted about my trigeminal neuralgia for the first time on my Facebook, and through that actually was able to find the neurologist that I now see and go to and am very happy with. And secondly, just take it a day at a time, and whatever you do, don't give up. Remember that you are living with what literal medical journals have called one of the most painful, if not the most painful thing that a human being can experience. Remember that you're living with what those same medical journals have called the suicide disease because it's no joke. Give yourself grace and don't give up.